As we reflect on the strength of our superheroes in our family community, it's also important to take stock of where we're headed in our search for treatments and cures. Next, we have an update from our relentless ally, Dr. Wendy Chung at Columbia University. Dr. Chung strives to create the knowledge base and resources that we need to accelerate our path towards clinical readiness. Her talk will be followed by a Q&A moderated by our Chief Patient Officer, Shannon Dennis. We encourage you to provide questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A or in follow-up. I now welcome Dr. Wendy Chung.
Thanks very much, Dylan. I'm really pleased to be here today. It's anyway, incredibly moving to be able to be here with you and to know just what this journey has been and continues to be. I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Dylan, if you can just tell me if you're seeing the full screen. Can someone tell me, are we seeing the right screen?
See your screen. If IMS can have us focus on the KIF1A meeting screen for us so it can be bigger. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kat. So I'm pleased to give an update of where we are and importantly, where we're going to be going. And obviously, we're here to be able to be with you every step of the way. And this is very much a team effort. And we need your insight to be able to think about what are the key things that we need to treat. And as we do this, to do this so that we don't leave anyone behind. The goal of this research, which has been ongoing for several years now, is to hopefully develop treatment and hopefully something that comes as close to a cure as we can. As we're doing this, my motto is always the care until the cure. And so as we're doing this, we want to learn from each other to be able to figure out everything from the treatments that are going to be most effective, the things we need to watch for, and using the tools that we have today, how we can use those as a bridge to things in the future that are ultimately, as I said, something that comes close to a cure. It's tough to do this, we realize, because this is a rare condition, and in part because of that, it's really important for us to stick together. As we talk about this, I'm intentionally using the title or the sort of name for this condition is KIF1A associated neurological disorder, or KAND. You've heard that referred to several times today. And it's important because of the numbers to make sure that we consider ourselves a single condition or a single disorder. I'll get into a little bit. There's quite a spectrum across the condition, and it's sometimes confusing to think about or know what to pay attention to. And it's challenging because, as I said, we don't want to leave anyone behind. We want to make sure that everyone in the community has potential treatments. As we're talking about this, we will, and I know my estimate is way underestimated, but right now we know of well over 300 individuals around the world. I know that the KIF1A.org group knows about many more people than I do, and that's good. But we know that it's international. We know that this is in no one part of the world. This isn't a condition that's exclusive to Sweden or to Jamaica or to New Jersey. It literally is around the world, and with, we believe, probably equal prevalence. We do know that there are differences in who's diagnosed around the world, and one of our missions is to make sure that no one is left behind and gets a diagnosis. And as you've seen today, the impact can be devastating for children that we've lost even before or around their first birthday, to individuals who continue to live with this condition into adults, but have problems with mobility. As we think about this, we're starting with understanding, because we're starting at a very, very basic level, to understand the diversity of the condition across the entire spectrum of the community, trying to come up with things that are going to be helpful to everyone, realizing that different people are going to need different supports and have different manifestations. And to do that, we need enough people with the various different types of KAND to be able to have recommendations that are going to be meaningful for them. We also know that this condition changes over the life course, that how this manifests and the struggles that there are at the age of 3 are different than they are at 13 and different than they are at the age of, for those who reach at 30. And so with this, we're watching very closely to understand how things change in particularly vulnerable periods of life. For instance, during puberty, when the body's growing and the hormones are changing, and other transition times such as young adulthood. With this, we want to be able to understand what's worked for different people because I do believe, and I've seen examples where there are things that have worked. And as we do that, to disseminate that information to one another, be able to spread that around the world so that we can again think about being able to be that bridge until we get to eventually someday a cure. So with this, I will say that I and some of our partners at Ovid and others that are thinking about the therapeutics have been thinking 3 steps ahead. So as we're thinking about treatments, and you're going to hear about that at the end of today, some things that we've been working very hard at in the lab to come up with those treatments. Simultaneously, we've thought about what it's going to take to be able to test out those treatments and to be able to understand what's working and to be able to work with the FDA and the EMA in Europe and other agencies around the world to be able to get to a point where this can be actually adopted by those agencies. So, with that, as I said, we're thinking 3 steps ahead and understanding what they will require. We've had discussions, I've had discussions with them already. So, I know what it is they're asking for. And that's why we're building in what we call this natural history study. So the natural history study for us is going to accomplish 2 things at once. Number one is it's going to inform what we're doing in terms of the treatments and the care for today. And then it will also be the foundation for what we need to do, as Luke said, to be able to measure any impact we might have of a new treatment that we might try in the future. And so doing that, we need to have data points to know day to day what life is like, how the body and the brain are impacted by KAND, and that way we can see if we're making a difference. And we're doing this in multiple different ways because we're not sure where we're going to be able to see the first changes. And so we're trying to understand as many different dimensions, everything from epilepsy to vision to movement to thinking and cognition, thinking about all of these different dimensions so that if we would see movement for any one of them, we are able to capture that in a treatment that we might have in the future. So as we do this, as I said, we're doing this in 2 steps. One is to be able to do the natural history study, and heretofore it's been largely done remotely. I'll say that was largely because of COVID, but as I'll be describing, we're also moving to the next phase of Koala, which we're doing in person, and allows us to get more granular information and will be more like the types of information that we might be able to be more sensitive to change. We might be able to see subtle differences. Let me first start by thanking everyone who's already been registered. If you aren't registered, or if you're not sure that you're registered, or you're not sure where you're at, I'm putting up 2 contact names. These are 2 of our, or one is a genetic counselor, Alexa, and Sean is our study coordinator, and their email addresses are here. Then they will help you to onboard or figure out where you may be stuck. In doing this, and I realize this is oftentimes burdensome, so we're here to help you through any step of the process. We want to make sure everyone's in the right club. That is, everyone really has KAND, and it's rare, but occasionally we've had folks come to us that thought they might have KAND, but they actually don't. And I want them to get to their journey, to get to their group in terms of whatever the condition might be. Sometimes we've been able to help them find that, but we want to make sure that they're signed up and getting the right treatment with the right types of doctors. And so the first is we want to make sure that you belong in this group. As we're doing it, we then have things that we can have you speak with Alexa, our genetic counselor, as well as completing some of the surveys online. And as we're doing this, it is a journey. And so I'll tell you, we're with you every step of the way. And as things change for you, we want to make sure that we understand that and collect that information. Some of you may remember this is an older picture, but it's our first meeting where we got together. And I have to say, in tribute to the leadership of the group between Luke and Kat and Shannon, there from the very beginning in terms of doing this. We started out very small in 2017, and you'll remember our last in-person meeting, we grew astronomically. And if we were to get together again, I'm sure we'd this year and show a picture of all of us each year continuing to grow exponentially, because we know the condition is actually very common, much more common than our numbers would appear, because many people just aren't getting diagnosed. I'll start out by showing a little bit of basic biology to help you understand where some of my comments come from. Some of you have seen me or others show this movie before, but let me help you understand the biology. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not, but the protein KIF1A is shown by this. It looks like kind of a man holding up a big boulder and walking along what is a microtubule or a train track within the brain cells or the neurons. Within this, this boulder that's being held up is what we call the cargo, or things that have to be moved along the brain cells, both in the brain and through the spinal cord and through the nerves through the body. Some of those neurons are quite long, and in fact, those are the ones that we often see greatly impacted, but we see many different neurons impacted. Um, as we see this, these feet on the that you see here moving that are making contact with the microtubule require energy to be able to move. They require ATP as energy, and we know that many of the genetic variants that affect individuals with KAND, those genetic variants are oftentimes within this feet region here, within the portions that are flexible, the portions that are making contact with the microtubule, and or the portions that are making the ATP and releasing the ATP. Within this, there's quite a spectrum in terms of what we see, and I know this is a bit overwhelming. I don't expect you to absorb it, but this is just a linear figure of the gene that I just showed you, this KIF1A. This is on the top, splayed out in one long line, but this motor domain, those feet that I showed you in gray here, is blown up down below, and each of these is a different genetic variant that we see. I don't expect you to absorb all of this, but the point being that there are many, many, many different genetic variants, and in fact, almost an overwhelming number. Each genetic variant is a little bit different. They tend to cluster in some ways, either by the way they act or how severe they are or how they affect the protein. But my point in showing you this is not to overwhelm you or not to make your eyes glazed over, but to realize that depending on the treatment that we might use, it is possible that there will be different treatments depending on the different genetic variants. And because each individual is a little bit different, I don't want anyone to be left behind. And so it's very, very, very important that that you stand up and that you're counted, that we know your genetic variant, we know a little bit about you, and we will try and make it minimally burdensome. But if you're not represented, we can't guarantee that you'll be included in the solutions that are coming up. And it's very possible that the solutions will be dependent on the particular genetic variant. That is, that there will not be a one size fits all for KAND. So I can't underscore this enough. No one else can represent you. You have to represent yourself, and you can't depend on someone else to do that for you. Some of the families you've seen from today have been incredibly generous, more generous than you can ever imagine in terms of donating literally their children to be able to help us understand KAND and to be able to come up with the treatments that we're talking about. So as a community, we're literally all pulled together to make this work, and I don't want anyone to be left behind. As we're doing this, I'll just go through briefly. For those of you that have a copy of your genetic report, that's what we use in terms of determining eligibility. If you don't have that, we'll help you either get it or we'll get it by signing a medical release, but that's sort of the entry ticket to be able to get into this. As I'm going to talk about, we are trying also to make sure, because of the many languages around the world, we use international translators with the telephone translation. We have folks working different hours of the day to make sure that from a time zone point of view, it's convenient for you. Please tell us how we can make this easier for you, and we promise we'll do our level best to meet you halfway. To show you that we are very international, as I said, we have folks from around the world. I'm sure we're going to see more and more of the world represented as more individuals have access to the testing. But this is not specific in any way based on language or ethnicity or ancestry. It really is an equal opportunity condition. So let me delve into the data, and if you have questions, put those in the chat, and Shannon will help me as we get to the Q&A period. So this is the distribution of folks that we have within the study currently. We expect it to be approximately the same number of males and females, and we do see that approximately that is the same. We see mostly that we see young people at this point. Now, that's not to say that I don't think these young people will grow up and will be older people, at least many of them. But I think this is showing what currently, at least in the United States and Australia and Europe, where you see largely the world represented in our community, those are representing the ages of individuals that are getting genetic testing. Again, we're trying very hard to pass legislation in the United States to open that up so that everyone can have access. But I think this is in part reflecting who is getting genetic testing as we're going through. Um, with the symptoms that we're seeing, it is largely symptoms that are related to the brain and to the brain cells or the neurons. I'll get into some of this. We do see some manifestations in other parts of the body as well in terms of the intestine, the urinary tract, the kidneys, but for the most part, where we see the biggest impact in terms of day-to-day functioning is the brain and the nerve cells going to the rest of the body. So through the spinal cord, through the muscles, going to the arms, the legs. That's where we're seeing it, as well as the brain cells that are going to the eyes that are affecting vision. One of the things is that not everyone has everything necessarily, and there are some individuals who, the younger that you have symptoms, in general, it tends to be the more of the manifestations here that you have. That is, that age of onset of symptoms is a good marker for severity in terms of the involvement, especially of the nervous system. Within this, as I said, I do expect that for some of these, for many individuals, we will see the symptoms evolve over time. And in general, we expect this, unfortunately, to be a progressive disorder. So that is, if individuals did not have issues of optic nerve atrophy or visual problems, impairments, when they were diagnosed at a young age, it is still possible that that will happen over time and evolve. And so the things that I'm showing you here are things for your doctors to be able to be on the lookout for, because again, if we can keep individuals safe by keeping their vision as strong as possible, by putting safety measures in place, we know that we have many people who've had in the community who've had broken bones as an example, and it takes a period of time to recover from that. And we want to minimize those types of problems. Seizures, I'll get into a little bit more, but is also a point that I think all of you know about, but especially anything that looks like a seizure, you should be talking with your neurologist, your epileptologist, so that they can definitively evaluate that and potentially start treatment if that's necessary. With this, we do see some modest issues in terms of growth, and you certainly saw in some of the videos individuals where the problems in terms of feeding and growth were so severe that they required gastrostomy tubes or tubes in the nose to help with feeding. I want to emphasize that not everyone requires that, and if we do have some families with new diagnoses, to again emphasize that there's a range of severity and disabilities, so not everyone will have all of these symptoms, and it will not progress at the same rate for every person. So let me go through a few of these that are more common, and to say that problems can evolve even in terms of hypo and hypertonia, that is low muscle tone and high muscle tone and spasticity, but we tend to see evolution to more spasticity over time, more hypertonia over time. I'll also say that many individuals have been misdiagnosed, I would say, with cerebral palsy. And that was a diagnosis that really the underlying cause was KIF1A. And so Luke and Kat and others have worked very hard and very successfully to make sure that the cerebral palsy community and the peripheral neuropathy community are aware that in many of those children, the diagnosis will actually be KIF1A. So that's actually being extended to more and more what we call gene panel tests for many neurologists are using. We also can see that in terms of brain volume, again, in part because things may either start smaller and be microcephalic or smaller brain size, or because they progress with atrophy, that in general we do see smaller brains, and that's a reflection in terms of the brain health and the individual neuron health. In terms of seizures, and again, there's quite a bit of variability. So at some point, I'm happy to have offline discussions with individuals for particular gene variants. But on average, we're seeing the age at first seizure to be about 5 years old. Now, depending on whether you look at the median or mean, it may be slightly different. But the point is that not everyone starts out with seizures at birth, that some individuals, they may not be for a few years until seizures are present. And in fact, as you're looking, this is age in months on the x-axis. You'll see that some individuals may be even more than 10 years old when they have their first seizure. But we do, at least for what we currently see in the community, see that seizures tend to be in the single digits, that is, individuals who are less than 10 years of age for their first seizure. The seizures can evolve over time. They may be different types of seizures. And so if you're seeing any type of movement that you're not sure what it is, it looks a little bit odd, I'll urge you to use your telephone or something with a video camera, take a short video of it and share that with your pediatrician, your neurologist, then they can decide whether or not an EEG is valuable. I'll also say that it's important to try and recognize the different seizure types to know if there are breakthrough seizures on the medications your child may be on, because again, if there are seizures that aren't treated, these can cause problems in terms of cognition, learning, other things as well, and we want to be able to get those seizures under control. Sometimes I will say that there are things that look like seizures, and when we hook your child up to the EEG, they're in fact not seizures. So there can be other behavioral differences as well, and not everything that might look like either spacing out is necessarily a seizure. There can be other behavioral differences, and so important to be able to look at the electrical tracings. I'll also thank many of you in advance who have shared your EEGs, the actual sort of squiggles. We have a team here with Jennifer Bain, who's on today, and Tristan Sands at Columbia, who are looking at that data to try and understand better the specific seizure types and trying to figure out and dissect what is going to be some of the best medications we can use for the seizures. I'll say that we're collecting the data from you about what medications you're using, and it's a little bit all over the place, I'll admit, in terms of different medications. I've seen it often the case that individuals will start on one medication, a very commonly used medication, something like Keppra or valproic acid, and then over time with some individuals there's escalation. That is that the seizures are becoming more numerous, they may be more frequent, they may be longer, and so seizure medications are sometimes added, and certainly many individuals have emergency use medications when we need to be able to break a seizure. What we haven't seen so much of in terms of surgical procedures, sometimes people use a vagal nerve stimulator to be able to put in and control the seizures. That's not what we're seeing with this community. And in general, we're not seeing that dietary interventions like a ketogenic diet have been effective. And I'm not really surprised by that. So it looks like it's medication more than anything else that's been helpful. And in many cases, medication is helpful. And it often takes some tweaking because there can be side effects from some of the medications with sedation that can also be problematic. So still more to come. We're also seeing a number of other medications that are being used for the spasticity, as I talked about. Baclofen is a medication that's used oftentimes for cerebral palsy, but it can be used for individuals in our community, either as an oral medication or in some cases as a pump going into the back. So baclofen used quite effectively for the spasticity. Also problems with attention or focusing, and so different medications used for attention deficit. I've put one example here, but also other medications that have been used as well, and many of those have been effective. Thank you. As I said, many of you have had MRIs. One small point about the MRI. At this point, I don't think it's very likely that changes in your MRI are going to change what your doctors are going to do for you. So, in terms of making a decision about should you get repeated MRIs of the brain over time to see if things are changing, I would say largely the answer is no. We do see over time that individuals who have had those MRIs, we do see that we can see shrinkage in particular of a part of the brain called the cerebellum. And we see loss of neuronal cells or loss of brain cells. And that's how we know in part that this is a progressive condition associated with degeneration. But again, I don't think this is going to change the immediate management for you. And if it requires sedation, for instance, in my opinion, it's not worth doing that. But we are learning from those of you who have had those done and are sharing that information. As I said, depending on when we look, because again, this is progressive, there's some individuals in which we may see nothing, other individuals where we may see loss over time, or by the time we see it, there may be parts of the brain that are smaller. Those are either the connection from one side of the brain to the other, called the corpus callosum, or as I said, problems with what we call the cerebrum, or the front part of the brain, or the cerebellum in the back. One of the other really important things is with vision. Vision is very, very commonly impacted, and this can be in a variety of ways. It can be either the eye itself, and we see in some cases even things like cataracts. We can see with the nerve coming from the brain into the eye, optic nerve atrophy, that again is problem in terms of being able to see and being able to make also the connections to the part of the brain called the part of the brain that we see responsible for cortical vision. And so cortical vision loss is actually a brain problem rather than an eye problem. In some cases, portions of this can be corrected with glasses, but not all of this can be corrected with glasses. We have also seen in some cases nerve palsies and strabismus or a lazy eye. And so again, your eye doctor can help understand what parts are treatable and what parts we need to compensate in terms of just making things safe for our young people. Things like brighter contrast in certain circumstances, the built home environment to keep things safer, or a para or someone at school who can help in terms of watching over your young person. One of the things that I have to admit was not something that I first recognized, but we have seen with increased frequency are issues with the kidney, the bladder. These are not overwhelming. So again, I don't want to cause harm or cause consternation for anyone, but we are seeing some relatively minor things, but that need to be treated if they're there. What I mean by that is for some individuals, they have problems where the urine flows backward going up to the kidney, and that can cause problems either in terms of kidney function or infection. We can see some individuals who may have been born with a kidney that's absent or that looks a little bit different. And in some cases, we're seeing individuals that over time are having problems in terms of urination. So even if your child started out in terms of, for instance, being able to hold their bladder or hold their urine, you may see some of those changes over time, and important to tell your pediatrician about this. They may be able to do some simple things like being able to look at the urine for problems that may be related to kidney stones or other parts of kidney function, and then if necessary, seeing a specialist like a nephrologist or a urologist. And some of that may be related to the nerves coming to the kidney and the bladder. Some may be more inherent to the kidneys. This is not something of concern, but just incidentally, we've seen that some individuals have had some differences in terms of the genitalia. Again, it's not causing really significant functional problems. I say this mainly for reassurance that you're not crazy if you've seen something that's a little different, either male or female, and it's not looking like it's functionally of significance. As I said, we have seen certain individuals who've had trouble with growth. In part, this is related to also being able to eat and chew and swallow. And so certain individuals have help in terms of special diets or feeding assistance. Although we've seen individuals who have been treated with growth hormone, it does not look like that's either necessary or going to be a cure-all for things. So I wouldn't necessarily jump to growth hormone treatment. With the intestine, as I said, we do see with fair frequency problems either related to heartburn or reflux or constipation and things moving slowly through the intestine that can lead to discomfort. There isn't a magic solution at this point, but say that the typical medications we use, especially for children that may have disabilities, medications that help with heartburn or problems or things to keep things moving, as well as dietary things. And this is a little bit of trial and error to figure out what's less constipating, but getting on a regular diet for things that are not constipating can be helpful. The other thing I'll say is that many of you have reported some things that I haven't yet shown that are not seen all the time, but we have definitely seen. So I want to make sure that you realize it's not just your imagination. I do think there are core to KAND. Some are behavioral issues, and I've seen these changing over the life course. Some individuals have an autism diagnosis. Some individuals have problems in terms of being more anxious, especially when there's new situations. They're not able to anticipate things, and others where they just feel really a need to have things in a very set way, and maybe a bit more obsessive in terms of the way that plays out. That's okay. I think there are ways of being able to prep and help support individuals who have those issues. And like I said, that's to a certain extent based on what they can take in and being able to really plan for things and anticipate things and not being caught off guard. There are several things that I think are related to the nervous system or the nerves that we can see, but they manifest in slightly different ways. One is that oftentimes there's an increased tolerance to pain. And so things that might be painful to you, others aren't experiencing pain. That sometimes leads to delays in diagnoses. That's one of the things I wanted to alert you to, that they may not be complaining about problems that would be painful to other individuals. And so, whether it be a broken bone or a sprain or something else, like even as simple as appendicitis, may get delayed in terms of diagnosis. So, if there is something going on, take it seriously. Some of the other things we see are things that are related to the autonomic nervous system. Sometimes you'll tell me that, for instance, hands are either very cold or very white, or conversely get very red and get very hot. And that has to do, I think, with blood flow that's going to the rest of the body that's related to the nervous system going to those parts. Some people tell me the skin is very blotchy, sort of, either very sort of purpley or lacy. And again, I think resulting from the same thing, as well as problems in terms of temperature regulation, especially this summer's been really hot and sometimes it's really cold in the winter. And folks, you may need to be very careful with them in terms of just being able, as I said, either because they can't tell us or they're intolerant to those temperature changes. Finally, I'll say that sleep is sometimes, not for everyone, but sometimes an issue. And when that is an issue, it gets to be harder in terms of behaviors the next day. I'm getting close to the end, so we're almost to the Q&A, but I'll say that from some of the things you'll hear later this afternoon, we have been trying to understand the differences by genetic variants. And one of the things that the KIF1A.org has rightly prioritized is that there are certain types of genetic variants that are a little bit different. And I won't go into the gobbledygook of how to read these out, but there are certain ones that affect what we call splicing. And when you see these plus or minus ones here, these may affect splicing, or there's some cases where we think it basically results in taking out one of the two copies of the KIF1A gene, such that there's only half the amount of the protein that's working. In those cases, the protein that's working may be perfectly fine. It's just that there's not as much. And it's especially important for us to understand what individuals with this particular type of KAND are like, because some of the treatment strategies that we're thinking about might actually take out the one copy of KIF1A that's not working, but that would leave individuals with only half the amount of the KIF1A protein. And so individuals who are in this category may help inform for the rest of the community what that might look like. And my guess is, based on what we've seen so far, that it's definitely milder. I'm still think there are probably some features associated with it, but they may be milder in terms of the features. So one other thing we've been doing is looking at people over time. This is one of the measures we've been using called the Vineland Adaptive Behavioral Scale. Each of these spaghetti lines, they don't quite look like spaghetti, but these lines are looking at people at two different time points. And so these lines are meant to show you that over time, some people get better, Some people get worse, and on average, that dark line in the middle is the average of everyone across all of those lines. On average, people are declining slightly over time, suggesting again that it is a neurodegenerative condition. And this is something that actually is very, very, very important to the FDA as we try and go forward with treatment. That is, that they will give us certain dispensations or being able to increase the urgency for conditions that are degenerative. And so the more that we can be confident of this and demonstrate and show the evidence of this, it's really important. I do want to emphasize, though, that, as I said, not everyone is going down over time. There are certain individuals, and we're looking especially closely at those individuals. Is it because they're just continuing to develop skills over time, as many children do as part of normal development, or is there something different about their genetic variation or the treatment that they've been using? And so with this heterogeneity or these differences in the community, we are trying to understand the basis for those differences to, again, be able to do more of the good and less of the things that aren't working. So just to emphasize, in a good way, there are things that we're not seeing. So we're not seeing problems with cancer. We're not seeing heart disease. We're not generally seeing problems with diabetes or autoimmune disease. And so those things, I'm pretty confident at this point, we're not going to have to worry about. And those end up being very, very important as we think about different treatment modalities. So even though we don't see them, it's good to know why we don't see them and to be confident that they're not there. So just to summarize everything, I think we're getting increasingly confident of this different spectrum of what can be involved. I do think most of it is related to the brain and the nervous system, but being able to now understand sort of specific genetic variant by genetic variant and understanding what's similar across those so that we can have even more specific guidelines by genetic variant, I think is our next phase within this. And so looking forward, I'm going to just very quickly say, for those of you who are already enrolled, thank you, thank you. This is your data. This is what you've shown us. And so this is giving this back to you, all of this available and to share with any of your doctors. We do have some very specific things that we've been learning about. So like I said, the EEG tracings, the MRIs are going to be especially important, as well as the rare epilepsy survey, which is going to help us because I do think at least one of our primary outcomes as we think towards treatment is going to focus on the seizures. The FDA has given us feedback on that, that's a priority. Because of that, I'm just going to plant the seed that we've been already exploring how to have you quantify that at home with a seizure diary. And so just be on the lookout in the future. Besides this rare epilepsy network survey, I anticipate we're going to hopefully find a way to relatively painlessly but track seizures in terms of both quantity and quality over time so that we've got the baseline data that we need to go into any future clinical studies that we might need to. The last that I'll mention, and many of you know about this already, is the Koala study, which is funded by KIF1A.org and in partnership with them and the family leadership in terms of thinking about things that matter and things that we're able to measure. And this is now going from online to in person. And we held back from making this in person until it was going to be safe to travel and safe to be able to come to a medical center. This is based at Columbia University in New York City and is a 2-day evaluation where you're going to be able to spend some time with people who I consider to be some of the most knowledgeable people in the world about KIF1A and being able to be assessed in multiple dimensions. The dimensions that I talked to you about in terms of what's important, everything from movement and spasticity to being able to understand how the brain is working, how quickly it's working, what things are strengths, what things are weaknesses, how the eyes are doing, different parts of the eye to the brain, the electrical activity that we're talking about, and then be able to get some blood samples for what may be very important biomarkers or things that we can see in the blood to see if things are changing. For those of you who may not be right around the corner from us and need to travel greater distances, KIF1A.org has been working very hard to generate the resources to help in terms of covering some of the travel expenses. And so you'll be able to reach out to Kat for that. I put the email address here, the KIF1A _study at cumc.columbia.edu, or being able to go back and the email for Sean or Alexa. And for those of you who may have emailed them, Sean and Alexa are literally standing by right now and sending out updates both today and over next week to give you an update in terms of timing and to start getting those appointments scheduled. So I'll just say it takes a village. It takes all of us pitching in to make this work. I especially want to thank all of the families, KIF1A.org and Ovid Therapeutics, and some of the family and some of my team members who are here and online today.